Hello, I'm Richard Burton from the Richard Burton Watercolour channel here at Bempton on the Yorkshire coast, and today we're doing a painting of Derwent Water, the Lake District. We're going to deal with hills and water. Now, do you struggle with water? Because a lot of people do, and a lot of people have been asking me how to tackle these wonderful hills and get the reflections in a glass-like way that really look realistic. Well, I've got the technique today to show you. It's going to be in 3 or 4 easy steps. We're going to tackle that, and along the way we're going to have some mistakes, as you do, and I'm going to show you how we can fix those and create something really realistic. So let's get down to it. Also, we've got our free watercolour guide, which is 5 steps to watercolour. If you're new to watercolour or you're coming back to watercolour from a long way away from it, well, it's good for you. It's ideal for you. We've been building this over a year now. We've got 3,500 subscribers. It's perfect. It's absolutely free. It's just in the link below. Grab yourself a copy, see how you get along with it. I think you'll find it useful. First of all, I want to say a special thank you to Julie from the class, who has provided this wonderful photograph of the Lake District. And as you can see, it's almost a painting in itself. It's a winter scene, Derwent Water, I believe, and it's got that wonderful feeling of the atmospheric hills and the wonderful glassy reflections, and we're going to show you how we can capture both these wonderful effects in watercolour using some relatively straightforward staged approach, and it will be very effective. Okay, so we'll take the paper down. We've got 300 gram not surface paper, which is, this time it's a fully cotton paper, and let's get on with the drawing. Okay, so what I'm going to do is establish the horizon line, which is going to be sort of close to midpoint. I want to have a nice area of water to be able to get that reflective feel. Get that line in, and then from that, make sure it's straight. It always helps. And then once I've got that in, I'm going to put those suggestion of the trees, just to get an idea, the skeleton of the painting. So I'm just going to put the trees in, and then I'm going to work up the hills, so I get the mountains in the right proportions, just to be able to ensure that everything sits in its right place. There's not a lot of detail with this. I'm going to let the brush do the detail. I just want to capture the essence of the scene. Okay, so the equipment is going to be 3 wash brushes, a very large one, 2 medium size, and then 2 small brushes, one with more of a point, so that I can just pick up that final bit of detail. Now let's start with our colour story. So what we're going to start with is a lovely winter blue, and for this I'm going to use cobalt cerulean and cobalt turquoise with an element of yellow ochre on the warm side, with some purple, which is going to be magenta, and a little bit of cadmium red. Now, the painting itself, we're going to start onto a dry surface. I'm not going to pre-wet it because I want to place these colours and let them diffuse and keep that high level look. So we're going to just start with the blue, bring that down, leave a little bit of white cloud, and then I'm going to drop in some warmer yellow, which is just going to float in place, let that absorb, and then add some blue, add a little bit of crimson underneath it, and just develop this feeling of loosely and lightly effect of this winter sky. Now, as the colours have initially gone in and settled, I'm now going to strengthen the blue in parts, strengthen a little bit of the yellow, and strengthen the crimson on top, and just let that float in and absorb. And then we'll get that hopefully pick up a little bit of a 3-dimensional feel to the sky. Now, using this similar mix of colours, I'm going to tackle the water. This time I'm going to pre-wet the paper because it's just that little bit more glassy look about it, and I want to pre-wet it. I'm going to start with the warm colours. I'm going to start with the crimsons, drop that in, just to give that feeling of the the mountain range, just a little bit cooler than the actual mountain range itself. Just drop that in, drop some of the yellow in there to give a bit of a hint of that colour change. And then while that's soaking in, I'm going to put the blue in and drop the blue in to ensure that I can just capture that feeling of shape, diffuse shape to the mountain range that's been reflected in the water. Once that's soaked in, I'm then going to get a little bit more of the purple grey, which I'm mixing from that combination that we've got, and drop that in just to bring out a little bit of shape and a little bit of sense of shape to the mountains that are reflected in the water. Now as the surface moves from that damp to a moist surface, I'm just going to add a few ripples just to give that early indication of moving water. Just a few simple brush strokes will do the trick. Now while the water's drying, the sky has already dried, and we're going to go into that area and we're going to tackle the warmer shades first. So we're going to add some yellow onto a dry surface. I'm not particularly going to wet it, I'm going to dry it, but then diffuse some water into it to weaken it, and then also add a little bit of crimson in place just to set the warmer tones for the mountains first off and let that soak in. I'm also going to bring that crimson down to the tree line that just gives that colour variation, that initial setting for the mountains. Now as I let that dry, look what's happened. While we've been busy on the mountains, we've got a tide mark which is caused by drying up against the tape, and obviously it's just encroached in and it's just dried and created that horrible tide mark. Mistake? Well, don't worry, we can fix it. We'll fix it later, we'll let it dry, and then we'll come back to that. Now we're going to start with the mountains and give them some shape. We're going to start with the cooler end, and we're going to, with the distant mountains, we're going to have some cobalt blue, and we're going to have a little bit of crimson that we're going to add to that just to bring that into play, and just drop that in delicately and let the darker elements diffuse together so that we get that little bit of variation even in the distance, but essentially it's quite a blue tone to it. And then as I come across, I'm going to put some shadow on the side of the hillside, which in this case what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the colour in, which is a blue crimson, really grey, and now just drop that in and then soften it with some water either side. And likewise I'm going to bring that along the rest of the mountain, just varying it from a blue shade to a bit of a crimson shade in parts all along. I'm going to put the colours in and then I'm going to diffuse them with a little bit of water. Now I'm going to bring the mountains down to the tree line, and as you can see it's got that red, rich, ochre and red theme to it. And so what I'm going to use some cadmium red, deep shade, and we're also going to use some burnt sienna. I'm going to put them on my palette and mix them together, and also going to put them in separately and then apply them separately onto the paper and let it diffuse, come down the mountains, down to the hillside, down to the tree line, and just build it up gradually. Now I'm going to add a little bit of blue to that burnt sienna and just create a bit of a grey, and drop that in as I come lower towards the water line where the trees are. But I'm going to carefully leave, there's a little patch of like a field, a couple of fields in the distance that have got snow on them that just stand out. So I'm going to carefully leave those and work around them, but gradually build up the grey tones in the foreground and up towards the mountain. Now I'm carefully letting these greys soak in, but all the time I'm going to add a little bit more to them and make them a little bit toner, a little bit deeper as I go. But just watching the surface of the paper, you can't see it so much from here, but if you look at the side, you'll be able to see there's a sheen on that surface. And if it's glossy sheen, you'll see that it's just too wet. So I'm waiting for it to go to a satin sheen, which means it's just got enough moisture in it, but it's not dry. And as I put those colours into that moisture, you'll see they'll hold the shape and they won't diffuse as much. And that just gives that little bit of shape and texture to that foreground. Okay, so we've had a break and it's dried now. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start putting that shadow and detail in. Using the greys, cobalt blue, a little bit of cadmium red, a little bit of yellow ochre, just to sort of give you that feeling. But we're going to drop those in and working from the distance and then work my way from the left to the right. I'm going to put those little cracks and crevices on the hillside, those shadows that are just capturing the light, making the difference to make it give that three-dimensional effect. Drop those in, but vary them a little bit. They're not all one colour. They're a range of colours, but they're build up the tone. Work from the lighter first and then gradually add some deeper shadow into each one as you go. And that will just make it come to life. Now likewise on the dry, I'm now reinforcing some of the red at the base of the mountains just to give them that little bit more sense of place that picks up that sort of colours that are in the photograph. Drop those onto the dry, but at the same time I'm diffusing a little bit in parts as well by just softening some of the edges to it, but build it in. Once I've done that, I'm now going to start to really make some stronger dark and put the trees on the waterline, put those in, gradually build them up with dark and increase the intensity as we go along, as we come towards the waterline. That will give that sense of shape of the diffused, lost and found edges for the mountains, the trees, the forests, and those small fields in the middle. Now I'm building up the greys and the shadows on the mountain side by adding some further darks just into the darks that I've already put in place, just to give them a little bit more shape and texture, and that will just gradually build up that feeling of the mountain range. Now I've added a little bit more crimson into that grey, as you can see on the left hand side. It's just making it a little bit more, it's a darker purple. I'm going to drop some of that in, starting on the right hand side and then just work my way over to the left. It just gives another three-dimensional feel to those shadows, which is going to be really important. It just gives that feeling of depth to your painting. Oh, look at that. I've just gone and chucked a brush there and made a mark. Don't worry, simple to fix. Wash my brush, add some water and just dab it out. And there you go, it's disappeared. Now I'm just adding a few more colours into the foreground, just making them a little bit tonally stronger, so it just gives a little bit more strength and a little bit more depth. And then as we continue the process, I'm going to add a few more greys to the dark. I just wanted a few here and there just to give that little bit more strength to the tops of the mountains in the distance. Now we've got that earlier horrible mark that happened with that sort of wonderful tide mark that's appeared, a bit of an explosion of cauliflower. Well, no panic. We're just going to wet it with some clear water now that it's dry, let that soak in, and then get my brush again, and then I'm just going to scrub the surface, just gently scrub the surface. In this case, it's quite an important area, so I'm going to put a little bit of pressure on the brush, add some more water, and just lift it off, and that will just diffuse and disappear. But the important thing is to make the wet area a lot bigger than the area that's actually affected, and then gradually it will just lift off and disappear and will be perfect again, and you won't see it. Now I've let that dry again, and before we do the reflections, I'm going to put a bit of masking fluid just to protect that frozen bit of lake, which you can see in the distance. I'm going to use that, just put that in with an old brush, mainly because masking fluid ruins new brushes, and just carefully drop that in and then leave it to dry. Okay, so now the wonderful reflections, which are the magic part of painting things like this, where you've got that wonderful glassy reflections, and watercolour's perfect for it. So what we're going to do, we're going to wet the water, let that soak in, and then I'm going to start with the cadmium red. I'm going to drop that in with it, have some burnt sienna nearby, and I'm going to drop that in mainly onto a damp surface, so the water doesn't want to be glistening. It wants to sort of have a dull sheen to it, so it can put those marks in, and then they will also just in vertical drops, so you just get that feeling of that diffusion, but that vertical diffusion, which is really what I'm trying to capture. I want to get that feeling of the reflections. Have a little bit deeper towards the right hand side. I've also got that little bit of clear area in the middle, which is just reflecting that little bit of snow field in the centre, which I'm just going to carefully try to leave and drop those in. And then once I've done the first layer, I'm going to drop some deeper red into the middle of it, just building it up slowly. I'm also actually conscious that I think the mountain range wants a little bit more tone in it, so I'm going to drop a little bit of red into the mountain range just to lift that as well. I carefully diffuse some of the marks as well in the mountain range, so it's not just hard edges. And now we come back again. Hopefully the water's just soaked in a little bit more, so I can just put a little bit more red in there just to lift up the reflections. And then alongside that, I'm also going to drop in some burnt sienna just to pick up a little bit of that as well, so that we're just building up those reflections and just getting those tones just right. And then let that soak in for a minute or two. Okay, so now that water is soaked in, we've got that diffusion with that red. I'm now going to put the dark in. I'm going to mix a bit of dark, using ultramarine blue, burnt sienna with a touch of crimson in. Starting with the lighter tone first. Again, I'm going to drop it. It's darker on the shoreline, and then it's going to come down, and just a few vertical strokes. Just let those diffuse into that existing delicately moist water. And then as I go across the page, continue the process, dropping those darks in. And it just gives that first sense of shape and that reflecting the woodland. And then once I've done that, I'm then going to mix a much stronger mix of ultramarine, burnt umber, or burnt sienna, I should say, and a bit of crimson, and drop in those final darks, particularly near the waterline. and just let them diffuse. That'll just give that little bit of extra three-dimensional feel to the water. It all has to be done quite quickly. It wants to be done and ensure that the paper is still on the damp side. I don't want it dry because I want to get that diffusion in place, but I'm also conscious I don't want it too wet so that I can put those marks in and they'll hold their tonal value but diffuse at the same time. Okay, so we'll now let that dry and we're going to deal with these trees, these really dark and interesting trees on the right hand side. And for this I'm going to mix a few patches of colour, get it all ready. We use some burnt sienna near to the red just to get that sort of energised. I'm going to make a medium dark, which is a really ultramarine blue burnt sienna. Drop that in, and then want to make a green, which is going to be cobalt turquoise, a bit of lemon yellow with a little bit of raw umber in it as well. And then I want to make a really strong dark green, which is going to be Prussian blue and a little bit of burnt sienna. And then we're all ready, so let's get in with the trees. So what we're going to start with the green at the top with a smaller brush. Just have those jagged eggs, drop the green in, make sure that I get a good sense of that green shape. Into that, I'm also going to drop some dark into that green once I put it in place. Just put that in the diffused stage, let that soak in, and while that's soaking in, I'm going to put some of those winter tree tops in, just using a different smaller brush, just a few dry marks, just to pick up a few of the branches that are sprouting up beyond the little copse there. Drop those in, and then as I come down, I'm going to then drop in some browns and just get that burnt sienna in, let that diffuse, bring that down, because that gets that colour change, which is in the heart of this little copse. It's quite different. And then into that, I'm going to drop in some really strong darks. And I want to drop those strong darks, let them diffuse, but also hold that little bit of shape, a bit like the same way we did with the water. Just let them sort of cascade in, capture the shadows. The shadows are towards the water line, also in the copse, in the heart of the woodland area as well. Drop that in and let that soak in. Now for the woodland reflection, the final touches. What we're going to do is we're going to wet the area immediately on the waterline. Let that cascade down a little bit. I'm going to drop some initial ochres in there, that burnt sienna, drop that in, a few greys in there as well. Just let them diffuse together, but make sure that I can see differences between them, that tonal differences. As I come down, I'm going to be onto a dry paper. This is important because this is where the reflections break away and you get those edges to them. So I'm going to put those in with a smaller brush and just get those few little touches that come down. A lot of the reflection is going to be diffused, and then you've got that edge to it where it just breaks into the water and it just makes the reflections come to life, having that combination of soft diffusion and then hard edges, that just broken edges into the water. And carefully, alongside that, now that the initial diffusion has softened, I'm going to drop in some darker darks, particularly on the waterline, just to give them some gravity, just some density that will just make that reflection come to life. Once I've done the reflection, I'm just going to reinforce the dark on the trees. Do this on the dry, just get a few edges here and there, just make it a little bit more realistic. Picking up an odd tree trunk as well and a few extra shadows all along just to give it that little bit more intensity. And as you can see, tonally it's a lot darker is this woodland area. Okay, so now it's dry again. I'm going to take off the masking fluid by just carefully rubbing off the surface, getting rid of all that. And then I'm just going to add a little bit of blue onto that frozen lake area and just cascade that in just to cool the white down a little bit, because I can just see that little bit of subtle colour change. And also I'm looking at the mountain and I think, well, it just needs a little bit more shape to it now it's dried, because that's the trouble, it does dry a lot lighter. And you just need to sort of take stock of that. And I'm going to add a little bit of blue into the mountain range and add a few more darks here and there. And then I'll add also a little bit of interest as well, okay, just with the brush when it's dry. Now all that's left is just to take stock, and I just think I just want a few ripples again on the water. I don't think I quite caught them enough initially, so I'm just going to re-energise that area that we started with, which was the sky purples and the shadows, and then wet the water and just put a few delicate brush strokes across just to capture that feeling of moving water, gently moving water. And that's about it. And hopefully you can see by breaking it into steps, having that drying period between those steps, we've ended up with quite an effective painting. Okay, so there we have it. I put a frame, well, put a mount around it this time, actually. And we've got our finished painting of a winter scene at Derwent Water in the Lake District. I really quite like it. I don't know what you think. I think we've caught the elements we wanted to. We caught that reflections. We caught that diffused effect of the reflections of the hills and the trees in the water. We've got the layered distance for the actual hills in the background, using those different layers of colour, just building them up delicately, and a lot of it done on the damp surface. And remember those gaps in between. That was the key. And of course, along the way, I threw my brush on it. I had that bloom in the corner. I had a few issues that we needed to correct, and I could show you simply how by letting it dry and then re-wetting, we lifted those off, and you'd never know they were there. So I'm quite happy with it. Have a go. It's one that I think you could follow, and hopefully you'll enjoy having a go at. Also, I want to say a big thank you to those of you that were enrolled into the online beginners watercolour course. We're getting a lot of positive feedback, and it's great to hear people getting involved in it in detail and really finding it useful. And it's pleasing for us because I put a lot of effort into this. It's a culmination of me painting for 40 years, teaching for 20 years, to cover all the basics, all the elements I find to create these watercolours that really give people confidence to go forward. So if you want to solve your problems with watercolour and find the easiest and simplest way to create effective landscapes, click in the link below. Also, I just want to say a final thank you. We've now got 11,500 subscribers, which is massive for a 13-month-old channel. And without your support, we wouldn't be able to get these videos out to such a wide audience. And of course, a lot of that is down to the fact that people are subscribing. And of course, if you're new to these channels and it's the first time, don't forget, please do like and subscribe. It does, once again, picked up by a wider audience. And it just enables us to be able to celebrate the joys of watercolour. And for now, once again, I hope you enjoy and keep painting.